And so in the next hour and a half or so, you can talk and I can talk, and he will definitely talk about matters of interest to all of us, about journalism, about reporting, about the Middle East. And let's start by talking about impartiality. Something which interests me greatly as a reporter for the BBC myself, someone who has to very much cleave to a code of impartiality, which is something which our founding statutes, I suppose you'd say, at the BBC, it's written in those, and we have to stick to this. But here's a quote from the foreword to the new book. A reporter's supposed lack of bias, which I suspect is now the great sickness of our Western press and television, has become the antidote to personal feeling, the excuse for all of us to avoid the truth. But Robert, you know, what if people aren't actually interested in your feelings and what you think about it? Well, what about if they just want to read the paper to find out what happened?
Look, if they want to read Reuters, it's there. If they want to read the AP, it's there. If they want to read...
Well, it is for us. It's not for most people.
Well, then they can pick up any morning newspaper, by and large, except the Independent, where they'll find a bit more. Look, I think the point is that it isn't a question of the feeling. It's the issue of, you know, the American School of Journalism, you have to give 50%. You can hear me okay, by the way, or not? You're fine. You have to give 50% of each story to each side in the dispute. And, you know, that's okay in a football match, very impartial. You're reporting a football match, or a public inquiry into an M40 extension in the north of England or Birmingham. But when you're dealing with the Middle East and you have a massive human tragedy, I think you have to be impartially on the side of those who suffer injustice and those who are being occupied and oppressed. That doesn't mean politically, it doesn't mean you have to support I found Arafat such an arrogant man. I realised that I've never been so savage about anyone in my previous book, but Arafat, that was pointed out to me, I hadn't realised it. And it certainly doesn't mean you have to be pro-Israeli. You don't have to be pro-Iranian, which is pretty difficult most of the time, and you certainly don't have to be pro-Bush, which is impossible most of the time. But I do think that you have to have a moral, I hate to use that cliche, compass. I think, you know, if you walk out of this building and you see an atrocity, you're angered by it, you have feelings. Well, we should be able to have feelings too. We're not machines that sit out in the Middle East saying, well, you know, scorecard today, 3 Palestinians, 1 Israeli. The spokesman for Israeli Defense Forces says X. The PLO, no, a Palestinian doctor claims that X, Y. Goodbye, I'm going home, cup of tea, that's it. That's not what we should be doing.
Yeah, okay, but on the one hand, on the other hand, is not the way to do it. I absolutely agree with that.
And the other one is sources.
But wait a second, but let's talk about this business of feelings.
Sources.
What about the example? We were both there in Beirut in the summer of 2006, during the war there. You and I both went round the southern suburbs when it was being absolutely
south of Lebanon,
pulverized, and south of Lebanon as well, when the Israelis were pulverizing the place. And we both, I hope, reflected the reality of that in what was in our different kinds of reporting. You know, I do TV and radio, and you do print. But, you know, at the same time, Israelis on the other side were receiving rockets, missiles.
But nothing like the casualties.
There was nothing like the level of casualties, there was nothing like the level of damage. But, however, for them, it was a very big deal. So their feelings were also in play as a result of that. So what I'm trying to say, I think, is, as reporters, shouldn't we just get a little bit above feelings? And because without the context, the wider context of what's happening, feelings are just basically, well, they're angry and we're angry, and where do we go from here?
Well, we have a correspondent, as you know, in Jerusalem, as you had at the time, and Don was with the Israeli army and actually came briefly into Lebanon with them until they all ran away, him, Don too, as he put it, if the IDF runs, Don runs too. And I was on the other side of the border. Now, I'm not going to sit there accounting for Israeli casualties when I've got dead children from Qana lying at my feet whom I'm writing about. The casualties were nothing like equal. Most of the casualties on the Israeli side were military. Most of the casualties on the Lebanese side were civilian, as we know, more than 1,000 of them. I used to run a little scorecard each day as a kind of mockery of American journalism, saying today's exchange rate is 3 Israelis for 27 Lebanese. And in fact, I took the cynicism of this balance of casualties as far as you could take it to say, look, you better realize who's really suffering here. And of course, the reason why the Israelis were so upset at the end is they didn't win the war. They got nowhere except getting a UN force in. And now the Hezbollah, and I was there 5 days ago, looking at new sets of bunkers north of Litani with deep underground landline telephones, and all the villages in the south are empty. Read it in the Independent next Monday, I think, because they've all gone to Iran for training. And I know this because one of them came back dead with bullets in him and was buried as a martyr in Tyre 2 weeks ago, just outside Tyre. So the next tragedy is already being planned. And one of the things I think that we didn't show up properly in that war, looking back on it.
One of the many, as always.
Yes,
you know.
but one of the things was that most wars, in fact all wars I've ever covered, are also primarily to test weapons. The Americans could test weapons in the hands of the Israelis, and the Iranians could test their new missiles, particularly the one that hit the Israeli gunboat, in the hands of the Hezbollah. It's a weapons testing range. And we shouldn't doubt that for a single moment, because the moment you go to the next arms fair, you'll find the Americans' weapons being boosted as combat-proven in Iraq and by Israel. And if you go to the Iranian stand, and there is an Iranian stand at Western arms fairs, they'll be trying to flog a new missile to you and tell you off the record it's the one that hit the gunboat, which almost sank, by the way, the Israeli boat. That's another side of the story we don't do, because at the time, you know, you can't go around checking that the Iranian military attaché is watching through binoculars, as he is, of course, in Beirut.
Let's talk a bit about the job of a journalist. You, as well as being, you know, in my opinion, a great reporter of what goes on there, and, you know, I've seen Robert out and about many hours probably before I've got up, doing the things that need to be done. He puts in the miles around the place. But what is the difference between what you do as a reporter, Fisk the reporter, and Fisk the columnist? Columns, which some of which are reproduced in this book, which are opinionated.
Oh, yeah, highly.
And, you know, that's the place of a columnist. You do an op-ed piece, that's your place, you know, to be opinionated. But do you think, in a sense, that compromises Fisk the reporter? Because people will say, well, everybody knows what he thinks anyway, what his views are.
Well, they sure go on reading it.
Well, that's good. That's a good
thing.
thing.
No, I mean, I think...
yeah, sure, people go on reading columnists, but that's the whole point. Do you think that over the years you have become really more of a columnist, of a provider of opinion, rather than as a reporter of the news?
No, actually, I was saying to a journalist the other day in Canada that I thought one of the enormous privileges I have, and it is a privilege, as I have to realise my own good fortune, as well as the fact that I have an editor who prints what Fisk writes, which some would probably disagree with, but he doesn't, he prints everything. And that is that I can be a street reporter putting in the miles and watching bombs and writing about it, and I can also be a more human being and show the anger I feel at innocent people being killed in the column at the end of the week, as well as often in the column itself. You know, I think that when you see a thing like Kana, 96, for example, 105 Lebanese civilians blown to pieces by Israeli shells. You know, there was babies on fire, people burning in trees, men with no arms dying in the arms of their daughters, terrible scenes. You've got to show your feelings about this and say who fired the shots, not sit there and say, on the other hand, an Israeli spokesman said they were unaware, which they weren't, as it turned out, of what they were shooting at. And the Hezbollah claimed they didn't have their families, but other people, local Shiites, claimed, and you're back doing the 50%. Look, if you were reporting, and you'd have to be very old, and so would I, the slave trade in the 18th century, you don't give equal time...
Surely you didn't cover that story, did you, Robert?
No, I wished I was an Arnhem, actually, but that's a different matter. You don't give equal time to the slave ship captain. If you're present, which we weren't, at the liberation of a Nazi extermination camp, you don't give equal time to the SS spokesman. I was in the, this is our time, August 2001, the Sbarro pizzeria in Jerusalem. When I got there, a Palestinian suicide bomber blew himself up. There's an Israeli woman with part of a chair leg through her, and a child with no eyes. I didn't give equal time to the Islamic Jihad spokesman, and the same went Sabra Shatila, where I was present. I didn't give equal time to the IDF spokesman who'd sent the murderers in. I think you need to take a moral position.
Let's talk about how you started out in journalism. I know there are a few things that Robert wants to read to us tonight, and when I certainly joined the BBC, there was a whole course that we did called news writing.
Yes, you're going to get that in a minute. Yeah.
Which was basically something which translated the things that we used to do as students. I did history, you know, essays.
I did
linguistics. How we well, my goodness.
And Latin.
How we were, you know, we had to convert into being reporters, and I think you've written about that.
I was 17 when I first arrived in Newcastle upon Tyne. It was a city of heavy black 19th century buildings a spider's web of iron bridges and smouldering steam locomotives, the air thick with coal smoke and red haze from the steelworks at Concert. The news editor of the Evening Chronicle, John Brownlee, did his best to cheer me up. "You'll be in our Blythe office, Bob, a bustling little coal town on the coast with plenty of life and lots of news." Brownlee was in estate agent mode. Blythe was a down-at-heel collier harbour, smothered in the dust of doomed mines and 1,000 coal fires. The slag heaps glowed red at night, the dying shipyards were bankrupt, pools of vomit lay splashed over the pavements outside the Blythe and Tyne and two dozen other pubs and clubs every Sunday morning. Even in summer, a kind of North Sea mildew settled over the town, a damp, cold cloth mixed with coal smoke that smothered all who lived there. I was homesick and lonely, and I was paid £17.50 a week, a third of which I handed over to Mrs. Hamilton, my landlady at 82 Middleton Street, where I slept in a room 7 feet in length and just 5 feet wide with a single tiny gas fire. When I came home one day, I found the gas board asking my landlady why there was no money in the meter, and I had to explain that I didn't earn enough to pay for the heating. So I spent all evening in front of fire in the rotting old back-to-back Chronicle office in Seaforth Street, then walked home through the smoke at midnight and cowered under my blankets for warmth. I used to read history books on Sunday afternoons, wrapped in a heavy overcoat, sitting in the overgrown Victorian beach garden near the port. And we wrote in cliches. Always cliches. When the police were seeking a hit-and-run driver, they either spread their net, or narrowed their search, or stepped up the hunt. Company directors were bosses, scientists were invariably boffins, officials were always chiefs, storm-battered ships invariably limped into port, suicides were always tragic, brides always beautiful, angry councillors were hopping mad, and protesting villagers would always take to the streets. Those who discovered bodies were horror-struck or mystified. The latter applied to the construction gang building a new Blythe bypass, who excavated dozens of corpses, all in their Victorian Sunday best, and thought they discovered a mass grave until they realised they were digging up a cemetery. Needless to say, Tory election candidates always lashed out at the sitting Labour MP, Eddie Blythe. I went back to Blythe 3 years ago with a friend of mine, just to impress her on how awful it was, and it was just the same. In the car, the rain guttering down the windscreen, the same old grey streets shimmering through the glass, I opened the Evening Chronicle. Nothing had changed. All that follows came from one single issue. Bosses, leading a management buyout of stricken shipyard camel lairds, say a £2 million damages claim from former workers could scupper the bid. Keywords: bosses, stricken, scupper, bid. A pair of high flyers will be winging their way to France for the most gruelling cycle race in the world. Keywords: high flyers, gruelling. A mum of 3 who lured a teenage girl babysitter into a seedy sex session with a stranger she met through an internet chat room has failed in her bid to cut her jail term. She did go to prison, you see. Lured, seedy bid. Jetaway MPs have been condemned for heading off on foreign jaunts rather than holidaying in the northeast to help the region's ailing tourist industry. Sympathetic though I was to the MPs as I glanced at the weather drizzling down outside my car, I got the message. Jetaway, jaunts, ailing. And police hunting the murderer of Sarah Cameron have spread their net abroad. Yes, almost 40 years after I'd been writing this crap, the cops were still spreading their net, and I had little doubt would soon be narrowing their search or stepping up their hunt for Sarah's killer.
It's all there, isn't it? It's all there. In the Middle East, I've always thought history plays a very big part in events. You know, one of the fascinations I've found over the years covering the Middle East and living in Jerusalem and so on is the fact that history seems so important there. You know, as one Israeli writer said about Jerusalem in particular, it's a city where the dead are more important than the living. You also think that, don't you? I mean, history is a big, reflected in your writings. You write a lot about the past.
I have the biggest library I've ever had in my life in Beirut, as well as in Europe, all about Middle East history. And I think that one of the things we don't do enough is, along with our reporter's notebook, we take clippings and cuttings, but we don't take history books. And the interesting thing is that the people who live out there know much more about Middle East history than we do. And they don't understand.
Well, history's alive there, isn't it?
Well, I'll tell you a perfect example. There's a guy I know. His name is Mohammed. He lives in Sabra Shatila. Every morning he gets up and shit in this dull, dark, crabby confines of concrete and dirt. Now, he is living the Balfour Declaration right there, as it is for him. He's living in that because of Lord Balfour in 1917. For us, Lord Balfour is 1917. For him, it was last night or this morning. And that's why we say, oh, they're so angry, they're so angry. Of course they are, because history is living for them. The frontiers we laid down, not frontiers that they chose.
And Britain bears a heavy responsibility.
Unfortunately, it does, yes. The odd thing is that you keep finding all these people who were totally betrayed by us because they believed Lawrence of Arabia and independence of the Arabs. And they keep saying, if only the Europeans would help us. And one of the problems is, I think, that the oppression and the feeling that we can always conquer them, which we regularly do, is such that they've come to feel that we actually are in some way all-conquering and superior. I gave a talk at Nabatea in southern Lebanon with a lot of Amal and Hezbollah in the audience and their families on the Arabic edition of my earlier book. And at the very end, this guy stands up and said, please will you tell us as a foreigner what's going to happen in Lebanon? And I said, it is doomed if you keep asking people like me what the future of Lebanon is. Go down to Jibshit and ask your neighbours, and then you won't have any more foreigners here dominating you. But this is something that we, you see, have sowed in the soil, I think. We've allowed them to feel that they are so oppressed by our cultural presence, our tanks, our armies, our swords, and so on, that they actually have come to believe it, which is a great tragedy, because they've got to solve it. You know, how do you deal with the Middle East? We've got to leave.
Yeah, I mean, bearing in mind that Britain's responsibility, bearing in mind our history and so on, apart from simply leaving, and, you know, with the exception of 2,500 troops, whatever it is now, outside Basra, pretty much left in that sense. And, of course, the residual presence of Tony Blair in the American Colony Hotel in Jerusalem.
Who hasn't been to Gaza yet.
Yeah. Apart from all the... He'd have to talk to Hamas if he went there.
Exactly.
Apart from all those things, what do you think that Britain should do now?
Look, it isn't just Britain, Jeremy. I think that the West has got to have a mature, social, educational, cultural relationship with the peoples of the Middle East. We keep saying we're going to go there and we're going to give them, you know, packets of human rights off our supermarket shelves and lots of democracy, and the freedom they ask for when you ask them tends to be they want freedom from us, which we don't want to give them. And as we arrive with all our democracies, we always, without exception, Napoleon did the same in the 18th century. He promised freedom to the people of Cairo from the Pashas. We did the same in 1917 in Iraq. General Angus Maud said, we come here as conquerors, as liberators, not as conquerors, to free you from generations of tyranny. And always we go with our Apache helicopters and our Humvees and our Abrams tanks and our swords and our horses. And we've got to stop having this military domination of the Middle East. There was an Iraqi baker asked me once, he said, Mr. Robert, why, when he said you, he meant me, the West, you see, here we are again, it was symbolic. He said, why are you in Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Israel, Turkey, Bahrain, Kuwait, you see? And still he goes on, Oman, and so on, Bahrain. And I couldn't give him a reply, because it's a kind of iron curtain that runs, it actually runs from Greenland, Iceland, if you think of the American forces, Britain, Germany, Bosnia, Greece, connects up with Turkey and goes right way down almost to Somalia. What's it for? I mean, these are the issues, I think, and we still don't know I don't know what the answer is. What's beyond it? China, Russia, India? But we've got to leave the Middle East militarily. We've got to get out.
Now, what about one of the people who helped us get involved, which was Winston Churchill? I know you've got a few things you want to read out about him. Well,
I did the Churchill lecture this year at the Cabinet War Rooms, and I came across some incredible things he wrote. I mean, bearing in mind that, of course, he couldn't see absolutely in the future, he did come up with some extraordinary material. Here he is, for example, 1936. He took a holiday in Morocco. This is the Daily Mail. He was making money because he lost all his money in the Depression. Even Martin Gilbert didn't get these documents. I should tell you how I got them, actually, Jeremy. When I worked for the Sunday Express, when I worked for the Sunday Express, I was on the Town Talk column, and I was chasing, starlets.
You were a gossip columnist?
Yes, I was for 3 years. And I
never knew that. That's
there you are. I thought. Anyway, I was chasing starlets that run off with vicars and so on. And actually, there was a Lord Mayor ran off with his son's bride on the wedding day. And
good training. Must have
good training for the Middle East. That was right. Anyway, the papers said, the word went round, they were chucking out all their Second World War clippings and all their Winston Churchill library because they're putting it all on that silly electronic screen, which is useless now. So I went and microfiche, and every night I took carloads of this stuff out to this little apartment I had, and I've got it all now. So I have all the Daily Express library on World War II and Winston Churchill. This is when it was a serious paper. Here's what I found from the Daily Mail clipping in the Express library for 1936. He's been on holiday. The Arab inhabitants are a perpetual attraction with their flowing, many-coloured robes. Every peasant is a picture, every crowd a pageant. If winter sunshine is the quest, here is its achievement. This is Churchill in travel agent mode.
He's on
Thus far...
He's on holiday.
Well, he's actually behind you, looking rather more eminent there. Thus far, all smiles. Is there a darker underside? The Moors are a proud and ancient race, till only yesterday a race of conquerors. Are they tamed? Are they reconciled to this new civilization with its order, its efficiency, its many benefits, its proofs of active progress, and its sense of effort? Or are they dreaming of the days of greatness? The faith of Islam holds them all in a discipline of its own. From the balcony of an up-to-date hotel, one heard all night long the chants and drumbeats of the mosques, an endless repetition of choruses in which war and religion have an equal part. Who shall plumb the future? That's why I always say, when I quote things like, I put ouch afterwards.
You know, I'll tell you what, one thing that strikes me about that quote is that some people now talk about political Islam and its more extreme forms as well as something new, that the secular moment in the Arab world has passed by. But I suppose you could say, well, it was secular for a little while for people in films in Cairo and for a while in the 60s and the 50s, but actually that religious thread has been all important.
It was secular in Egypt in the 30s when people wanted to have political power through elections, and when they tried to get rid of the king, we locked them up. So they went underground and it started becoming religious, even at the time of Nasser. I've actually got somewhere a wonderful quote. This is from when the British
Is this Churchill again?
No, this is not Churchill. This is two Iraqis who were talking to British agents in 1919 and 1920 in Iraq after we've arrived in order to bring them freedom, independence, liberation, so on. And this is the time, of course, when Woodrow Wilson had published his 14 points. So this is Alwan al-Yasseri. This comes from a PhD thesis by an Iraqi who knew what he was on about. This guy says to a British official, probably an MI6 agent of the time, on the 5th of July 1920, "You have offered us independence. We never asked for it. We never dreamt of it till you put the idea into our heads. For hundreds of years, the country has lived in a state as far removed from independence as it's possible to conceive. Then you come with your promise of independence, and every time we ask for it, you lock us up." And here's a guy talking about Woodrow Wilson, Abdul Rahman al-Naqib. I don't agree with what he's saying, but it's lovely. He knew what was going on. "You talk about national self-determination, and what is its value? I trace it to America, and I hear the voice of Wilson. Does Sheikh Wilson know the East and its peoples? Does he know our ways of life and our habits of mind? Do not submit to guidance from Sheikh Wilson." You know? You'd think of somebody else who might be putting that one now.
Tom, I asked you a question again that is about the modern day, I think. And another thing from your book, your new book, you say that, and I'm taking this, it's a fragment of a sentence, you could say it's slightly out of context, but you're saying that in Britain, the role of the press is very important because it's come to play the role of parliamentary opposition.
Yeah, because
now,
the Tories voted for the war.
Yeah, but you know, is that really the job of the media to be the parliamentary opposition? We're not elected. We're given soapboxes, but you said that it's come to play that role
because the Tories voted for the war.
No, so you think then that that's not a role that the media ought to play?
In principle, we should have an opposition that's worth voting for. We haven't. That's the problem. You know, the press, it's not the fault of journalists that we've ended up as a voice of the people in a way we never intended. I mean, you know,
but
you had a voice of the...
You see yourself as that now, though, don't you?
No, 1 million English people saw themselves as that just before the 2003 war, but nothing happened.
They don't have a platform on a major national newspaper in the way that you do.
Oh, yes, they do, because we talk to them, but I don't think Tony Blair did, you see. That's the problem,
But
Jeremy.
look, Robert, you say here, my own journalism over the past 5 years has concentrated more and more on the sheer hypocrisy of the political, military, journalistic nexus of power which is deployed to fool us.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, it's a very valid issue, but is that the job of a reporter? I mean, I get back to my earlier point, which is that because you've done so much and because people read and listen to what you're saying, that you have really gone beyond and above being a reporter, and perhaps that's what you should concentrate on, and not on the
No,
rushing
no.
around the place and trying to find out what's
There's
going on.
nothing worse than a columnist who pontificates from London or Washington and isn't on the ground to see the reality. And what I can do, I hope, in however imperfect a way, is I can be in the villages of southern Lebanon, see the air raids, be in Iraq, see what's happening to the Americans, and still have a column at the end of the week when I can say, bloody hell, you know, this is what Blair sounded like on TV when I sat in Baghdad. And
But you're something more than or different from just a regular reporter then?
Oh, I think so. But I think there's something else that you're slightly missing, and I'm only pointing it out.
Okay,
and that is a lot of my columns are not about the Middle East at all. They're about
I know.
what turns out to be my obsession: steam locomotives, the Titanic, cinema, novels. You know, I was contemplating the other day how important trains were in Russian literature. Anna Karenina falls in love on a train, falls out of love with her husband at Leningrad railway station. She commits suicide under a train. Leo Tolstoy died in a railway station. And you remember Dr. Zhivago was all about trains, wasn't it? Both in the movie and in the book. So if you read... Yeah.
So what is it? Is it Imperial Russia struggling with modernity?
Well, it was equivalent of Terminal 5 at that stage, probably, wasn't it? If you remember, there was a wonderful scene where Zhivago is coming back to Yuriatin to find Lara in the snow on the track. And in the book, he goes in to have his hair cut because he wants to look smart for Lara. And the woman is a woman barber, you know, sort of Bolshevik Soviet barber. He says, well, you know, how'd you get it? He said, oh, I had to sleep every night in trains. You know, he said, had to sleep in, you know, cattle wagons and restaurant cars marooned in the snow, and sometimes in special trains. And there's a wonderful moment when she's cutting his hair. She says, you better be careful, you know, all this talk of special trains. The book's much better than the film.
Why, when you went on Desert Island Discs, did you choose as one of your records the Israeli national anthem? Because you have many critics in Israel and among their fellow travellers and supporters who would be absolutely gobsmacked to hear that.
They were. Well, first of all, I first heard it played in full when the Israelis were at the Al Alamein anniversary, because, of course, the Jewish brigade and Jewish soldiers in the British Army died and have their own graves at Alamein. There are many Arab Palestinians, of course, who are also buried at Alamein. So you go along the cemetery and you see a Brit, a Palestine Jew, because that's what he would have been at the time, a Palestine Arab. And I thought it was a very beautiful piece of music, and I said so on the programme, I was always struck by how wonderful and inspiring this music is. It is actually Mlad Vast by, who wrote Vltava, Czech composer.
Czech guy.
It's Massacres, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Right.
what I did is I put it on this programme, first of all, because I thought it was a beautiful piece of music, and secondly, because I said, if only the Israeli government and the military would behave with the honour and beauty that's implied in this music, that they could really be the light among the nations, which they say they are. So that's why I played it. I also...
That's a bit barbed, isn't it? A little
Yes,
bit barbed,
yes,
a little
absolutely,
bit of a twisted. You're making
absolutely.
a point there, choosing that.
I wasn't twisted, it was straight to the point. Like I put Churchill on as one of my discs in 1940 to compare his voice with Tony Blair. Hitler knows and he must break us in this island or lose the war. That isn't the voice of Tony Blair, is it?
No, not exactly.
I absolutely and completely believe I'm right, you know. Sorry.
While we're on the subject of Tony Blair,
I thought we'd get this.
let's hear a little bit about Iraq as well. You have a letter, I believe, from U.S. Army Major in Ramadi.
Yes. I've got his permission to read this to you. I'll only read a little bit. He basically writes back to his family these fantastic letters, what it's like trying to reconstruct Iraq. And he's almost Joseph Conrad. Some of the things he says I don't like, but you should hear this. We are trying to empower their own police to walk post instead of Marines, but the graft has not yet taken and is hampered further by the graft. There is something culturally childish in their understanding of basic Western governance and management that will require immeasurable education and probably several generations to overcome if they find it of any interest. That education is, of course, a choice that they have to make on their own. They are not our people. Our understanding of their tribal governance and its relationship to formal civic management is equally naive and charges our frustration. The problem now is that every inconvenience has become our responsibility. They act as if they cannot comprehend our sacrifices and are thus ungrateful for them. The reality is that they cannot culturally comprehend our altruism or believe our stated intentions. Even though it is not their desire to offend, we are insulted, and it bleeds us of affection and tolerance. Liberation will compete with invasion as our legacy, but locally we are ideologically irrelevant. Our presence is mostly only of interest to those who seek to benefit from our contracts and donations. It is a region of people making alliances, business deals, friendships and enemies one day at a time, without a real concept of sustainable services, resources or trust. No future, just daily survival as they know it, family and tribe. Our contributions may be counted long after we have withdrawn, but they will not recount the names of the fallen, so many now. Each wound will be absorbed into the quiet sadness that we allow to pass beneath us as a people and a country. Our loss will have never even occurred to most people here. Isn't that beautiful? And that guy is Joseph Klein.
It's sad. Sad is Joseph.
Oh, but he has a great sense of humour. Listen to these two sentences. He's talking about setting up the provisional government, right? He's writing home. So, what news about the new government, you may ask? Well, the provisional military governor was replaced by the transitional governor, who resigned under threat and was replaced with another transitional governor. He was then replaced by the emergency appointed governor, who was just replaced by the selected governor chosen by the elected provincial council. He never made a speech or publicised his views, never debated other candidates, and was not present during the selection. He was promptly kidnapped by a rival tribe, etc. So this actually makes you say, poor old Americans.
That's a mess, isn't it? That's a definition of a mess. What do you think about the surge? The consensus growing in the States appears to be it works.
Well, I was talking to my colleague Patrick Coburn, whose book on Muqtada Salah I strongly recommend to everybody. Patrick's view is it hasn't, that the worst thing has already happened, and it's true. The walls are up across Baghdad, a massive version of what happened in Belfast, and everyone has been divided into sectarian blocks. So there are fewer people to kill now, so it worked. I mean, you know, I think this is something, you see, which is about journalism too, is the way in which militarily we want to divide people. Now we want the insurgents to kill their colleagues by paying them and making them, calling them another organisation. And we're always dividing people up, you know. I mean, our newspaper maps, Shiites at the bottom, Sunnis in the middle in the famous triangle that looks more like an octagon, Kurds at the top. We do the same with Lebanon. Shiites at the bottom, of course, again, Shiites on the right, Druze in the middle, Sunnis at Sidon and Tripoli, Maronites north of Beirut, and we sometimes put colour-coded in. The British Army, you will remember, Jeremy, used to have maps of Belfast, which were colour-coded. Obviously, Catholic was green, Protestant was orange, and if you were, you know, stupid enough to intermarry and have a mixed area, it was coloured a sort of colour of a very fine brown sherry, you know. But you know, and this is, you know, what we do. We make them, remind them of who's in the next village, but we don't do this to us. I mean, I can draw you a very good map of Washington, black and white. I could actually almost draw you a good map of Bradford in ethnic origin. I could certainly do you a map of Toronto, in which a whole area of the city called Mississauga should be green for Muslims. In Montreal, the English-French divide actually runs down the metro line. But we don't print those pictures because we live in this superlative, superior society where we don't acknowledge.
I guess in Montreal or Toronto, they don't kill each other all that often, do they?
No, but we use these maps to encourage them to kill each other, do we not? To remind them where why don't we just drop them by air over Baghdad to help, you know?
Let's talk a little bit about Lebanon.
I mean, we have lots of rioting in coloured areas of Britain, but we still don't print maps, do we?
Let's talk a little bit about Lebanon. Who killed Rafik Hariri? I understand the UN is getting closer now to setting up well, they're setting it up to operating its tribunal. Who do you think is going to be in the dock? And do you think those people would be the killers? I
think Ba'ath Party security arranged his death. I don't think Bashar al-Assad did. Just after, I was 400 metres from the explosion. I saw Hariri on fire on the ground. I knew him quite well. And in the paper, in the following 3 days later, I named the top 4 Lebanese officers working for the Syrians whom I believed were very close to the killing, must have known that it might happen or would happen and was going to happen. As a result of that, and I mean, the fact that this following happened is some proof of what we're talking about. A Lebanese army general asked to meet me at Paul's coffee shop downtown in Beirut. They have a French Paul's in Beirut. And he arrived in you know, cross stars in his general's uniform, and he said, "Robert, don't use your landline, it's being tapped." I mean, I think it's tapped by, you know, who knows. I mean, I'm not going to say bin Laden's at 55 Acacia Avenue. You know, there's not much point in worrying about it. But he said, I said, who's tapping it? And he said, the écouteur, the listening department of the Sûreté Générale, the General Security. I said, who's doing it? And he said, General Tufayli. And then I said, well, what about my mobile? He said, that's all right. And I said, how do you know? He said, because I tap the mobiles and I'm not tapping yours at the moment. But I then printed Tufayli's name in the paper and said, because the Amn-Alam Écouteur department makes so many mistakes, my home number is 370615 Beirut, just in case you've got the wrong number to tap. But clearly that tap was put on by Tufayli, who's now happily, you know, no longer in his job, who was another pro-Syrian officer. So why were the Syrian side of the military nexus in Lebanon so concerned that I was putting these names in? Because they realized that there was a connection.
What's the political outlook in Lebanon? There's been this long-running crisis going on for, you know, there's been no president since last November, but it's been going on since before then. 16 months or more, 18 months now, the country's been politically pretty much paralyzed and split. Is there an easy solution to that? Or
no,
what's your prognosis,
it will remain, Jeremy, as long as the Americans and the Iranians are in political conflict, and especially if they end up in military conflict. I think one of the reasons why the Hezbollah are building these bunkers is if anybody, just anybody, fires a missile or a rocket or drops a bomb in Iran, whether it be America or the Israeli proxies, then Iran, or rather Iran's proxies, will shoot into Israel. So we have another Lebanese war. As usual, I mean, the whole story of Lebanon, since you first went there and since I first went there, is Lebanon is used by other countries as its bloody playpen. As opposed to those bloodless sandpits that is shown on television about wars, where we won't even mention names. You're not one of the names of the guilty, Jeremy, but you know what I mean. No. I think Lebanon is in a very tragic situation for two reasons. Firstly, because there is no way out as long as this superpower, regional superpower conflict exists. And secondly, because I fear very much that Lebanon, because the French created it, is a totally artificial state. You see, to be a modern state, it has to get rid of confessionalism. You know, the system where the president of Lebanon has to be a Christian Maronite and the prime minister has to be a Sunni Muslim and the speaker of parliament has to be a Shiite. But if you get rid of sectarianism and you have power on the basis of worth and academic value, it won't be Lebanon anymore, because the identity of Lebanon is confessionalism. So I don't think, I mean, Lebanon just goes from one daily crisis to the next, and I think it lives like that.
It's easy to find in Beirut and in the rest of Lebanon, it's easy to find people who will talk about the possibilities of a renewed civil war, but it strikes me that the fact that there has been this actually quite long-running political crisis now without one suggests that there's quite a demand for not having one, and also an awareness of the dangers, and in a strange kind of way, a certain kind of stability as a result.
I think that's absolutely correct. I don't think Lebanon is going to have another civil war. They don't want a civil war. You know, an awful lot of Lebanese during the real civil war, 1975 to 1990, sent their children abroad to be educated. You know, London, Geneva, Boston, Washington, wherever. And they've come back, some of them, not enough unfortunately, and said, what is this anachronistic, ridiculous place where these Zoama, these aristocrats, go around and argue and nitpick over where their seats are in Parliament? And these are people who, you know, have voices which are eloquent and can be heard. The other side of that, unfortunately, is that during those awful mass riots of thousands of people chucking stones in January of last year, when, again, it was a dubious privilege, but at least as a reporter I was on the streets seeing the real thing. If the army hadn't been there, the Lebanese army, and they actually, in some cases, acted very bravely. They didn't kill anybody. Imagine the British coming between 6,000 people chucking stones at each other and not even wounding one. The army stopped what could have been a very serious civil conflict.
That was a dangerous moment, wasn't it?
It was.
Certainly everyone I spoke to at that point, I mean, it seemed to be a consensus that they were half a day away from it.
Yes, we were. And I tell you, the problem there was that the younger men who were going bananas, chucking stones, throwing stones off 12-story buildings. I mean, you had to look up all the time. And the younger ones were not quite old enough to have a memory of the war. Their earliest memories would have been post-war Beirut. They might have remembered the ruins, but they didn't realize how easy it is to start a civil conflict and how impossible it is to stop it. So that was a danger, that we're almost too long after the Civil War for the collective memory still to exist among people who are grown up enough to chuck stones and wield batons and scream and shout.
Now, want you to ask some questions in a moment, but I know there's some other things you want to read out. So,
No, I don't have to.
well, what about one thing, since I've mentioned it? How did you get the title of this book?
Well, I was talking to I was giving a lecture in the States of Valdosta. I'd never heard of it before. It's in Georgia. And a very smart guy came up to me. He's a Vietnam veteran, very eloquent guy again. His son is a lieutenant colonel, a medical officer, lieutenant colonel in Baghdad. Very sad, in fact, because his other son is a doctor who's totally against the war, and the two sons no longer talk to each other. And in fact, when I met him, he said he'd just got a phone call from his lieutenant colonel's son who's in Kuwait, just going to be sent up into Iraq. And I said, how is he? And he said, he's frightened. But anyway, what he pointed out to me was that the military code in the United States has been changed, or was changed, by Rumsfeld. And this is a little piece I wrote about him, and it's the words that chill me. Sorry. In the week that George Bush took to fantasizing that his blood-soaked war on terror would lead the 21st century into a shining age of human liberty, I went through my mailbag to find a frightening letter addressed to me by an American veteran whose son is serving as a lieutenant colonel with US forces in Baghdad. Put simply, my American friend believes the change of military creed under the Bush administration, which I had no idea of, by the way, from that of soldier to that of warrior, is encouraging American troops to commit atrocities. So first, here's the official US Army's Soldier's Creed, originally drawn up to prevent any more Vietnam atrocities, any more My Lais. I am an American soldier. I am a member of the United States Army, a protector of the greatest nation on earth. Because I am proud of my uniform I wear, I will always act in ways creditable to the military service and the nation that it is sworn to guard. No matter what situation I am in, I will never do anything for pleasure, profit, or personal safety which will disgrace my uniform, my unit, or my country. I will use every means I have, even beyond the line of duty, to restrain my army comrades from actions disgraceful to themselves and the uniform. I am proud of my country and its flag. I will try to make the people of this nation proud of the service I represent, for I am an American soldier. And here's the new version of what is now called the warrior ethos. That's what the Pentagon calls it. I am an American soldier. I am a warrior and a member of a team. I serve the people of the United States and live the Army values. I will always place the mission first. I will never accept defeat. I will never quit. I will never leave a fallen comrade. I am disciplined, physically and mentally tough, trained and proficient in my warrior tasks and drills. I always maintain my arms, my equipment, and myself. I am an expert, and I am a professional. I stand ready to deploy, engage, and destroy the enemies of the United States in close combat. I am a guardian of freedom and the American way of life. I am an American soldier. Ouch. Like most Europeans and an awful lot of Americans, I was quite unaware of this new and ferocious code for US Armed Forces, although it's not hard to see how it fits in with Bush's rantings. I'm tempted to point this out in detail, but my American veteran did so with such eloquence in his letter to me that the response should come in his words. The warrior creed, he wrote, allows no end to any conflict except total destruction of the enemy. It allows no defeat and does not allow one ever to stop fighting, lending itself to the idea of the long war. It says nothing about following orders. It says nothing about obeying laws or showing restraint. It says nothing about dishonorable actions. Ouch. That was and it was this guy who's, I had no idea. I didn't see it in the New York Times. Did you know about this change of code? No. None of you did now. Incredible. You would have thought if they were proud of it, we would have seen it on the front pages. But I don't think they were. I think it was a way of turning the American army into something it shouldn't be, an aggressive, animalistic force. And that's why they use the word warrior.
Questions, ladies and gentlemen. If you could wait for a microphone to reach you. There it is. It has a green...
And questions to Jeremy too, please.
No, I'm asking questions tonight. There's a hand up over there.
I'd like to be interviewed by Jeremy too many times, you know.
It's warm and cuddly.
Compared to CNN?
Thank you.
I used to sit on a sofa at breakfast news in the mornings, you know. I mean, I can do cuddly. Sorry, madam.
Sorry, to save that, real pleasure listening to you this evening. Do you think that a Democrat president in the White House in the near future would make any significant difference to American foreign policy, particularly in the Middle East?
I don't think it'll make any difference at all. It's the same as asking, if Labour get into power in Israel as opposed to Likud. And everyone says, well, Labour is better, they'd be more compromised. If you sit in Lebanon, it's just the same. The bombs come down, whichever government it is. And frankly, I don't think that Mrs. Clinton is going to make any change. She's going to go on looking as Obama would. I mean, the good thing about having a Republican in is that at least he's been in a war. Almost every...
Well, McCain, you mean?
Yes, McCain has been in a war.
He's over 70.
I know, but it doesn't matter. He knows the horror of war, that primarily it's about death, not victory and defeat. Whereas everybody else has either dodged war, like Bush and Cheney, or they're like Blair. They've got it all from TV and Hollywood. At least there would be a man who knows that war is absolutely fucking awful.
I take it from what you're saying that you believe that it's a weakness in our modern-day politicians that they haven't.
Yeah, look, when we grew up, I think we both have some memory of this. I mean, Winston Churchill was Prime Minister, Eden was Prime Minister, he was in the First World War. I mean, when I was in Northern Ireland with you, William Whitelaw, William Whitelaw, you remember?
I remember William, yes.
First Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, he was in the crossing of the Rhine. Now, these people knew what war was. We now have people, and the only people who do know what war was, as the people whom we're killing, the reporters who go there, who get demeaned if they dare to suggest it's about horror and blood and sickness and dirt and smell, and the soldiers who can't talk because they're in uniform. It's quite a good sort of trap to be in, you know.
Mm. Next one, who's got the microphone? Your hand was up first, I think, sir. And then there's a question at the back after that.
Malik Al-Abda, BBC. First of all, I'd like to salute you, really, Robert, for two recent articles in The Independent about Syria. One of them was about, and I've got them actually in front of me, one of them is called Silenced by the Men in White Socks. Of course, the Men in White Socks are the Syrian secret police. About the way
I think it's a good look, myself.
I think someone's got a concession on Middle East security forces, and the only one different is the one who supplies the Israelis, who all have baseball bats the wrong way round on their heads. That's the only reason you can tell a Mossad guy from a Mahabharat guy.
Right. Yeah,
it's true.
And it's about the way the Syrian regime is clamping down on opposition internally. There's also another article which appeared this time last year about the Hama massacre. Will you be able to just talk a little bit about the Hama massacre, because it's a massacre which has left many thousands of people killed.
But I thought you said Hamas. You mean Hama?
Hama, yes, in Syria.
Hamas soon, no doubt.
Yeah.
No, well, in February of '82, there was an Islamic uprising, which we forget now, in the northern Syrian or central Syrian city of Hama, a place where there were uprisings against the French, just like there were uprisings in Iraq against the British in the 1920s. It was a Sunni uprising, an al-Qaeda type uprising. The Syrian president sent then Hafez al-Assad, sent his brother Rifat and his special forces to destroy this insurgency. In some cases, I got into Hama for 12 minutes. I actually went north. Everyone was told you mustn't go to Hama, life-threatening, no journalists permitted in, you'll lose your visas. So I went up to Aleppo, came down the main road, and just where there was a sign saying detour left around Hama, two Syrian officers stopped my taxi and said, would he take them into the centre of Hama? And the driver turned around and I said, yes, we'll go into the centre of Hama, no problem at all. And I got in, I saw them shelling mosques, I saw so many wounded soldiers, a starving woman who'd been counting corpses in a cemetery got in my car with her child, starving, I mean they were stick-like. And I gave the child a Mars bar and she grabbed it and started to eat for herself. That was a state of famine and famish among the people. They killed somewhere between 6,000 and 20,000 people in Hama, most of them civilians. One soldier told me when I was there that girls were walking up in the underground tunnels beneath Hama and throwing themselves against the soldiers and blowing themselves up with hand grenades. What does that remind you of? Suicide killers, of course. But we didn't think of it like that then. And that attack on Hama and those killings were totally supported by the West. We didn't say a single word against the mass civilian killings and the levelling of much of the ancient and beautiful city of Hama. And Rifat today, well, he's safe in the European Union, where we're very keen not to have any war criminals, with his bodyguards on Spanish territory.
Question at the back, I believe. Yes, that's right, that one, back row.
Is this working? It is.
It is.
I'm a cameraman, and I am often shocked and have argued with my superiors many times that we don't see enough on television.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've mentioned these politicians who have been to war and haven't been to war just now. You mentioned bloodless sandpits a moment ago.
Yeah, but we have been to war.
But can you please comment on that and tell us why we need to see more?
Absolutely. Look, I've said this before in this room, actually, but I'll say it again for people who weren't there. If you saw what we saw in wars, if you experienced seeing your colleagues or friends who are from that region dying, as you did with your driver, Jeremy, you would never, ever again in your life, for any reason, ever support a war. You know, I saw women and children killed by the British and American raids on the so-called Highway of Death, and the neighbouring highway, which had even more death on it but wasn't filmed, being torn to pieces by dogs for food. It was lunchtime. The desert dogs had arrived. During the 2003 invasion, March and April, an Al Jazeera crew came back from Basra with the most fearful pictures of terribly wounded and dead children. And they started feeding it down the line to, you know, Reuters and the agencies in London. And a voice came down the line from London. You probably know who it is. It's not the BBC, but it came and said, you know, there's really not much point in sending us this. I mean, we can't show this. And one of the Al Jazeera crew, who is exactly in your position, seeing the real thing, said, but please, this is what's happening. And then the guy came back and said, we can't show this sort of thing, it's tea time. And anyway, he said, it's a kind of pornography, right? And the worst moment came. I just was captivated by this. I was writing it down. You know, I couldn't miss this. And then at the end, the guy said, look, he said, it's quite simple. You have to understand, we must respect the dead. We don't respect them when we're alive or when we're killing them, but after we've torn them to bits, then we must respect their corpse. It is preposterous. Yes, we should not deluge people with an hour of gore, but we should show much more than we do. And of course, by not doing so, by having what I referred to as the bloodless sandpit, with various, always, you know, retired generals who are waffling on as if, you know, death doesn't occur in war, we blind our viewers and our readers and our listeners to the reality of war, which is exactly what the Bushes and the Tony Blairs want. Thus, we become lethal, because we're allowing them to make wars. You know, if 1 million people were on the streets of London before 2003 invasion, think how many there would have been if they actually saw what war was like.
You know, in the, I'll tell you something that illustrates this a bit as a TV reporter. In Baghdad in 1991, the Amaria shelter killings, yes. The raid on the Amaria shelter that blew it up, which killed 300-400 civilians, and I was there that day, and I went and saw the bodies and so on. And the cameraman I was working with, Rory Peck, who was member of the Frontline collective, and was killed a couple of years later in Moscow. I was working with Rory, and Rory, I said to him, look, Rory, I absolutely agree with you, this is a terrible situation. It was, and I've had the debate many, many times as a TV reporter with our desk people about what we can and can't show. But I said, look, try and do a mixture of shots, please, Rory. You know, do the, you know, close-up of the hands, the foot. And then I saw him, you know, zooming in on severed heads, and I said, Rory, look, please, that stuff is probably not going to get on. And he said, look, I'm just filming this. I know they're not going to use it. He said, I'm filming this so they can see it back in London and get some kind of reality check about what's going on here. You know, the argument against this, and this is the debate that people, you know, I've had in many, many times, is that by showing too much gore, and I personally think we don't show enough, but by showing too much, you devalue your own currency, that effectively people get too used to it, they get a bit freaked out of it to start with, and, you know, and if it is tea time, it's a bit ghastly if the children are in the room, and even if it's just later on, after 10 o'clock or after 9 o'clock or whatever, then after a while it would lose its impact.
No, there's no proof that people would get used to it, and we don't get used to it when we see the real thing.
Well, in other cultures, they do show it a lot.
Yeah, yes, they do, absolutely. You'll see people in Lebanon, if, you know, dead Syrian soldier will come up and start taking snapshots for the family album, yes. But I'm not talking about that, nor are we. Look, I've got a different question, which comes straight in on this point. Why is it that you can see in fictional movies at the cinema, Saving Private Ryan, etc., or the suicide bomb explosion in Rendition, which is a brilliant film, things which you are not allowed to see when it's real war? You can see it when it's totally manufactured by Hollywood, with blood everywhere. I mean, and people's chests bursting out and heads coming off. No problem, and kids can see this. But when it's real war, you are not allowed to see it because the governments under whom you live don't want you to see it, and we connive at that.
Well, I don't know if it's about government. I think it's a feeling of scruple, and I think it's also a feeling, say, the BBC, my employers for many years. they get a lot of letters of complaint saying, that freaked us out completely. You can tell us about it, but please, do we really have to see it?
Well, sorry about the letters of complaint, but sometimes, you know, the Iraqis also have probably, if they could write them in English, some letters of complaint.
I'm on your side of this one.
I know you are, Joan, it's all right. Creative friction is what we've got up here on the stage.
Exactly, yeah. No, I agree with what you're saying. I mean, I think it's an issue, and that we ought to show a bit more. Another question? You've had your hand up for a while. Wait for the mic, please. Yeah. Wait for the mic.
Ali Albazez, I'm just a civilian and a fan.
Well, be careful of the bombs coming.
Mr. Fisk, you mentioned in your writings and in the Great War for Civilization that after the fall of Baghdad, you saw buses of organized men, and you recognize some of them burning these institutions.
Because I've seen them burning institutions before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I don't know if they were burning cultural institutions as well, like the Quranic Museum in Baghdad, and if they were the same men, who might they be?
Do you know, I still haven't found out. I mean, what was clear at the beginning, I mean, there were two groups of people. Correct me if you think this is wrong, Jeremy, but there were two groups of people who were effectively destroying things. There were the looters, who were taking away everything from dentist chairs to money to, you know, the wheels off moving Mercedes, etc., and who clearly went in and looted the National Museum knowing what they were looking for, knocking over Greek statues as they went for the prize things, who clearly had already known before the war that this is where they were going because there were people out in the Gulf who wanted this. A lot of the stuff has been found in America, others have been found in Jordan, a few in Israel, a lot in Italy, others in the Arab Gulf states. This isn't looted material. There was a second group who were much more dangerous, and they would arrive in buses and burn a government ministry. Now, the Americans immediately put a guard on the oil ministry and the interior ministry, of course. There were no guards on trade, computer science, health, etc. And so what happened is that the institutions of culture and history were burned. I saw in front of me, in 1,000-degree Fahrenheit flames, Korans burning from the 13th century, and they did it deliberately. I went to the Marine base at the Palestine Hotel and said, excuse me, I think you better intervene here. One of the most valuable collections of ancient Korans in the history of the Middle East is going up in flames. Can you give me a location exactly? Well, look, come with me, you can see the smoke, you can drive down the road, I'll take you, follow me in a Humvee. I mean, I actually said that to him, I was prepared to take the Americans to this place. Well, the guy said, hold on a second. Well, so there's some guy coming here who says there's a biblical seminary going up. No, good try. And they just burned. Now, these people, when I went back, there was another library on fire which had all the archives of the Iran-Iraq War, which we'd all rather like to have for history. That had gone up in flames. But I noticed that some of the people off one of the buses, and this is your point, were the same people I'd seen at the other fire. So they had been told to go and burn certain institutions. One of them realized I recognized her and, pointed a Kalashnikov at me. My driver at one point, who'd been a former Mahabharat man, like a lot of the people who were turning up to be on the other side, he and I followed this bus for a mile and a half out of Baghdad. All the men on board were being taken back, either to be told their next target, there were no mobile phones then, or they'd done their duties for the day. Now, when questioned about this, the Americans said, well, these are guys who obviously were paid by Saddam before he disappeared to make, Baghdad ungovernable. Well, hold on a second. If Saddam goes around handing out a $1,000 bill to everybody and says, when I'm gone, go and do the following, well, I know what I'd do. I'd let him go and put the money in my pocket and that's it. Why bother going around, burning buildings? So somebody was trying to destroy the cultural life and the cultural civilization of Iraq, and indeed we know that elsewhere in the great Sumerian cities, I've been across them, they look like a B-52 as carpet bombed. People have dug down through 4,000 years, smashing everything, pots, jewelry, anything to get at what's at the bottom, because collectors want 8,000-year-old material. And in this way, Iraq has been destroyed as a cultural heritage civilization.
So who did it?
I don't know. I never found out. Sorry, that's where the story stops.
Yeah.
I think we will find out, but not now.
Another question? Let's have...
a lady for a change?
This lady at the front.
Funny, in America, if I'm often doing the choices, they always say, it's time to have a woman, time to have a woman. God, the equality thing in America is very strong, so you benefited from it. Go on.
Oh, great, thank you. Nicole Jackson, Guardian. I was just wondering, psychologically, actually, to both of you, how you cope with the job you do, seeing the horrors that you do, and also, do you never feel a frustration? I mean, how much you feel you can change? I know you can point it out to people, but what can you actually do to make a difference?
Yeah, I don't know if you could hear the question at the back. It was,
sorry, it's not
no, it doesn't matter. How does it affect me to see the things I see? And what do I feel a sense of frustration that what I write, does it make a change? I'll answer the second question first. With one exception, proving that the Israelis knew what they were doing at Kana by proving on a videotape that they had a pilotless drone over the camp taking lifetime television pictures. I can't think of a single story I've ever written that's made a difference to anything. I'm sorry to be so pessimistic.
But doesn't that make you feel so
yes, occasionally, yeah. But the other question I say to you is this: it isn't a question of coping. If journalists go to cover wars and they don't like it, they can fly home club class with a glass of champagne. If they want to go on reporting it, they shouldn't complain about it. The people they should talk about who can cope or come to terms with or need counselling or all this other psychobabble language which drives me crazy are the people who live in the country, who have pariah passports, who can't get visas and who have to go on long after we have left from the war trying to keep their families alive. These are the people you should be asking questions about. Don't worry about us. We can get along. That's my view. And I never even think about the effect it has on me. I was asked, I'll be honest with you, I was asked in a cafe or pub in Beirut a few weeks ago by an Lebanese Armenian couple, the same question: what effect does it have? And I said, the other day they blew up Anton Ghanem, the MP in Lebanon, in his car. And a few days before, I'd been at a dinner he was at. We'd been chatting. As I saw Hariri, I knew him very well. And I got to the car very quickly and saw Ghanem lying there with blood all over him. And I felt absolutely nothing. That's what Lebanon has done to me. And I told this couple that's what Lebanon has done to you too. It's done the same to all the Lebanese. That's my answer to your question.
Have you ever?
Yes, after Sabra Shatila, I get very, very angry when I see dead civilians. That's why I say to hell with this so-called impartiality. These people were massacred, and you should feel angry when you see it. That's a proper human reaction, not let's rush over and see if we can get some spokesmen to justify it or say they're sorry. But Sabra Shatila, I did wake up after spending the whole day literally climbing over corpses that were stinking in the heat. And I woke up believing that all these corpses were piled on the bed round me. And the reason was that the smell was on my clothes. And my cleaning lady came in the morning and said, burn them. And I did. But that's the only time. The only other thing that happens is when you're very, very tired, and Jeremy will confirm this, you spend all day trying to stay alive and getting your story out, and all night unable to sleep because of the noise of bombs, so you get tireder and tireder, and you have little tiny hallucinations. My worst one, it still happens now when I'm travelling around, is waking up on an aeroplane and realising with horror that I haven't filed on my dreams. Vietnam veteran journalists had the same problem, but I do remember one day, because one of your colleagues put this on the BBC, on the correspondence programme on Saturday morning. I was half asleep in bed to say I'm going to stay in today. It was a Saturday morning, actually. A week later, I heard it on my little radio. I actually woke up and saw a little tiny miniature Israeli aeroplane fly through the window and go out through the French windows, and the pilot looked at me as he went through, right? I mean, it was about an inch high, I suppose. That's the only sort of mad hallucination I've ever had. And a week later, it was on the BBC. And you know who it was, don't you?
Who was guilty of that?
Gavin, I think. I'm not sure. Anyway,
really.
It was all right. It was good fun.
There are some people, Robert, who'd say, if I was a psychologist sitting here, the good people who deal with trauma, who operate out of this building, for example, would say that your inability to feel anything when you saw the corpse of someone you'd met, the dreams you're having, shows that you've actually been...
I've only had one dream
quite
in 32 years.
Seriously, psychologically damaged by things that you've...
Do I look psychologically damaged, don't
I? Ladies and gentlemen,
read this book.
The point what I would say is that, to answer your question, is that I think that what you do in life, the job that you do, the things that you do, leave a mark on you. And if the trade that you follow often involves seeing bad things, then that is going to shape you. And it certainly over the years has shaped me, and dare I say it, it is psychobabble, perhaps. I have even had some counselling as a result of that.
Oh, Christ, I'm sorry.
It's all right. But because it clearly works, that's why I'm such a well-adjusted person.
Yeah. Look, I think you'd agree with this, and I'm not trying to steal any thunder over you. I think you've got to be tough to work in a place like the Middle East, and you've got to take the sticks and stones, sometimes literally. You've got to realise that you are watching this massive, tragic piece of history, and in a terribly perverse way, you are privileged to do so.
Yeah,
and
I agree with
you're
that.
paid to do so.
And we're tourists.
No, we're not tourists, Jeremy.
No, in a sense,
I don't go taking pictures of Roman
volunteers
ruins.
Then, all right, volunteers. And the
yeah,
thing
we're
is,
volunteers.
We
We're
choose
volunteers.
to be there. And so I agree with what you were saying earlier on, that essentially, I think there is a bit too much now. People talk a little bit too much about the traumatic implications of the job of journalism.
It's not that
actually, we feed off it too. We need it. We need it, otherwise we can't do our jobs.
It's not that journalists don't feel things, it's that there are millions of other people who don't have our privileges, who have the same problems, who should be looked after. No, that's the way I think I'd sort of...
I agree.
You know, I was thinking... I'll give you another little end of reply to that. When I was doing the launch of my last book on the French and Dutch, I was spending a week in the boulevards of Paris, and then I was in Amsterdam on the canals, and I was in Antwerp. And obviously I saw, you know, happy families. Everyone in life has their problems, but people with families who were happy going out in the parks, and they were secure and safe comparatively in Europe. And I went back to Beirut, and I sat on my balcony over the Mediterranean. I've got a nice home there. And I thought to myself, you know, I was 59 then, I'm 61 now, and you can't wind back the movie and be, you know, James Bond again, or Joel McCrea as Humphrey Haverstock in Foreign Correspondent by Hitchcock. And I said to myself, you know, if I lived the life again, when Louis Heron of the Times, long dead now sadly, wrote me a letter as foreign editor saying, I offer you the Middle East, you know, I thought about King Faisal at the time, would I do the same thing again? And knowing what I did, and the answer was yes, I would. But I have to say that what Louis said in his letter was a bit like, you know, John Brownlee in Newcastle. He said, "You'll enjoy the Middle East. It'll be a great adventure with lots of sunshine." And he was right about the second part. There's no doubt about that. Lawrence described the sun as a sword, and he was correct.
Another question, I think. Now from the back now. There's one at the chap at the very back by the coats, and then we can go to you there with your hand up there. There, hand up, yeah.
Thanks. First of all, I just want to say I'm sure you're being far too modest if you say you don't think you've made any difference. The second thing is, do you think there is a force or a party or a country which is going to straighten out the Middle East, if you like? Do you think there's a force for good there? What's your best guess 50 years forward or 20 years forward?
Well, I'd like to say the European Union, but after Bosnia I can't. Well, it would be nice to look at beautiful neutral countries like Sweden and Finland, but they do, on Ireland, but they do their best in the UN, and they make sacrifices for it. I still feel, and Jeremy will probably disagree with me, I am still a great supporter of the United Nations. And with all their terrible, terrible experience and all the corruption and everything they've done wrong and all the meritoriousness of their policies, I still think the UN is the best thing we've got around if it's used properly. I was under fire with Canadian troops in Croatia once, and I was hiding in a ditch in my usual gut this way with the major of this Canadian unit. And we all this stuff flying around, we were debating the United Nations, and his point was that if there'd been a UN in 1914, we would not have had the Battle of Verdun or the Battle of the Somme. And he clearly believed it. You know, I think you don't go into UN service and risk your life unless you think there is something in the principles of an international organisation and peacekeeping that's worth risking your life for. And you know, an old UN friend of mine in Lebanon made a point to me very accurately. He said, you know, if a UN mission starts okay, it'll probably, in the end, after many years, succeed. And if it starts badly, it will be a catastrophe. And you only have to see that Bosnia was a catastrophe from the first day. Or as the Hillsons used to say, and with good reason. Whereas UNIFIL, with all its clogging up messy in Lebanon, in the end, they watched the Israelis leave, albeit it was the Hezbollah, not the UN, that drove them out. Sorry, the UN, that's all I can say.
Actually, I'm a fan of the UN.
Good.
I am a fan of the UN.
Security Council resolutions, unless you don't have to abide by them.
Yeah, that's all good. You had your hand up? Do you like a... Yes.
There is talk about infiltration of Al-Qaeda in Lebanon at the moment. That are making use of the the chaotic situation. What do you think about that? And what do you think about the quick withdrawal of the American forces in Iraq, and how would that impact the stability in the region?
Right, a BBC reply. Number one. No, I mean,
give
three and a half minutes. That's only going to get 3.5 minutes. In Lebanon, right. Look, Al-Qaeda may be attractive to some Sunnis and Palestinians in Lebanon, but not to many other people. At the moment, the Shiites of Hezbollah, unarmed, are in some of the southern villages, and they're looking for Sunni suicide bombers. And they are cooperating with the United Nations, although that's not officially announced. Because the Shiite Hezbollah know that if a car bomb goes off, as it did last year and killed the Spanish in southern Lebanon, Hezbollah will be blamed, as it was by the United States. And it wasn't Hezbollah, of course. We know that we had the Nahar Barad fighting, in which, by the way, about the same number of Lebanese died in 4 months as British troops have died in Basra since 2003. It's a heavy sacrifice.
That is an extraordinary statistic, bearing in mind it's actually such a small area.
156, and I think we've lost 157. And there you had an implantation, clearly, of a sort of Al-Qaeda-minded groupuscule. You know, Al-Qaeda doesn't exist as an organization. It clearly came in from Syria, or with Syria's help, although my understanding, and I won't bore you with why I've come to this conclusion, is that the Syrians did not expect that this would happen. It sort of broke loose on its own, which Al-Qaeda tends to do, and the Syrians did not intend for what happened to happen, for all kinds of reasons I won't, go on now. But it was an extremely serious matter because, of course, it did need, in the end, to have the whole camp rubberized in order to close down, even though some of them got away and got back to Sidon. The irony, of course, was that when the Lebanese army wanted more weapons, the Americans were flying C-130s night and day into Beirut, giving them helicopters with belt-fed machine guns but no missiles in case they used them against Israel later, and giving them reduced quality ammunition for their tanks so that they couldn't use them later in southern Lebanon. And of course, when did the Lebanese really need protection with weapons? They needed them in 2006 when the Israelis were dropping bombs. But on that occasion, the same C-130s were landing at Tel Aviv with weapons to be used against Lebanon. So that was the irony that most Lebanese, who lived there, picked up. So much for Al-Qaeda. What was the other one?
That was the main question, I think, about the Americans leaving, yeah.
The Americans will leave Iraq, must leave Iraq, and can't leave Iraq. And what they're looking for, I suspect, is moral grounds to say it's okay. I think that I've got one sentence I'll read to you to show you how they're going to do it. This is David Brooks in the New York Times. The most perceptive reports describe not so much a civil war as a complete social disintegration. This latest descent into chaos in Iraq was initiated by American blunders, but is exacerbated by the same old Iraqi demons: greed, bloodlust, and a mind-boggling unwillingness to compromise for the common good, even in the face of self-immolation. You see, the Iraqis don't deserve our sacrifice. The sacrifice the Major was talking. The same day as this, American servicemen writing in USA Today, the same thing. Iraq is unworthy of being called a civilization, was one of the quotes. So we are beginning to set up the Iraqis as being a people who don't deserve these wonderful gifts that we were going to give them. And that will be the grit that we shall spread on the sand to get our tank tracks moving and get us out.
We have time for a couple more because time's nearly run out. Who has had... You put your hand up, son? All right. And you at the back, too. So there's one here and there's one after that. There's one there.
Why do you think it is that so much of the British media supported the invasion of Iraq in 2003 so wholeheartedly?
Well, not The Independent, I can tell you that. Why did they? I think, Jeremy, you'd know more about this than me because I live out there. You see, I'm not here. I think, in the Americans, they're the people who actually go to war at the end of the day, and we tag along behind as a puppy dog. In American journalism, there is this parasitic, osmotic relationship between journalism and power. And, I've shown this example before, if I don't advise it, but if you watch a presidential press conference, Mr. President, Mr. President, Mr. President, say, yes, Bob, yes, Jeremy, yes, John, you see. And that's the relationship. And in America, for example, to challenge power, which is what our job should be, to challenge, to monitor the centres of power, as that great Israeli journalist Amir Haas always says. That is what our task should be. But in America, you don't get brownie points for doing that. You want to be close to power. You want to feel they're going to tell you things. And so you're always quoting official sources, US sources, intelligence sources, which is meaningless because they'll tell you anything they want you to write.
That's a bit discredited now, though, isn't it? A few fingers were burned, some lessons were learned after 2003. Look at that huge breast beating the New York Times.
2005, the Los Angeles Times, US authorities say, US officials said, one US Justice Department counterterrorism official said, US authorities say, we haven't even got to page 2 yet, several US officials said, those officials said, officials confirmed, American officials say.
Maybe it was a piece by US policy. Maybe it was a piece by US policy.
Well, that's real. You can come and look at it. Or there's at one point, there's a Jordanian official said, and then it goes back again. If you don't believe me, American officials said, say US officials, officials say, officials said, one US counterterrorism official said. There you go. That's the answer to the question. Okay, that's the American problem, right? I think the British one is that we have a long history here of having real war correspondents from World War II. I remember, I've got recordings of Richard Dimbleby over Hamburg in the firestorm. All I can see in front of me is a great white basin of light in the sky. War, we all want to be them, you see. I remember growing up with listening and reading and listening to the BBC recordings, scrapbook for 1940. Luftwaffe coming down now, a Spitfire right on his tail, and boy, the RAF boy got these chaps. Quote, United,
there was a lot of criticism at the time within the BBC about that, because there was criticism that not that I remember it, of course, because I was 20 years before I was born. But the thing was, people were saying these guys were just commentating on it as if it was a horse race or a cricket match. This is war, for goodness sake.
No, it was a vicar wrote to the Daily Mirror, and his words were, where men's lives are concerned, must we be treated to war on the level of a football match? But the Daily Mirror's front page editorial was, bloody marvellous, we've never heard anything so good as this.
Well, I actually had to read the BBC's internal records on this to write something about it, and they too were worried. Not so worried, it has to be said, as they were about the whole implication of correspondence income tax. There was a very thin thing about editorial.
Did they pay them?
The big thick file was whether war correspondents going ashore with the invasion in 1944 would have to pay income tax while they were abroad and out of Britain. And whether, in fact, it was necessary to, because it would be unfair, should they be deducted from their salaries? Massive internal debate in the BBC. Can I say that kind of thing does indeed still go on?
Yeah. But look, you know, I think there is a sort of folk memory of World War II, and there's an awful lot of testosterone starts floating around on the ground, and you get slipping on it after a while. When 1990, when Saddam invaded Kuwait, the wrong country, it was right when he invaded Iran, all kinds of American correspondents arrived, the most exotic camouflage clothes. One of them came in with camouflage boots with leaves camouflage painted on it. Those of you who have seen a desert will know that there aren't a huge amount of trees. And what was one of the funny things that happened is that many of the soldiers...
Probably something I left over from Vietnam.
No, these were brand new, believe me. I actually put in the paper what department stores they came from in Texas. And that's one of the places they're from. But anyway, at that time you found a lot of US troops, even Marines, were writing. They wanted to write. Not poems, just accounts. Or they wanted to talk about their dreams, and they'd hand me all these bits of paper. And it was quite extraordinary. All the soldiers, you could think, wanted to become journalists, and all the journalists wanted to be soldiers, you see. And that's part of the problem. War correspondent. Some of our colleagues actually wore these ridiculous military costumes. They were playing, it was theatre, and they were going to be okay because they were embedded, or in those days we said, in the pool. I wasn't, but they were.
No,
you know, that's your problem.
But it's editors that are making the decision higher up. Don't you put anything down to sort of political...
Oh, yes, of course. But you see, look, it is a fact. I don't think you'll find a single editor would deny it. Wars sell papers. Okay, it's a fact. So, you know, the idea that all the newspaper editors in the world are going to say, good God, I hope there's not a war, our circulation will go up, you know. But I think you have to, you have to accept that that's the case. And that goes back to Boot of the Beast and Scoop and Evelyn Waugh and so on. But I think at the same time that there's this sort of collective madness takes hold of people in time of war, even if they're just, you know, sort of watching on television. I mean, I remember in 1990, a colleague of ours, a perfectly responsible, reasonable guy, going completely demented. We've got to stamp out Saddam. Even the Arabs want us to. This man is worse than Hitler. I mean, Blair couldn't outdo this guy. And when the war was over, he'd been embedded, he had a costume on. When the war was over, he said, God, they lied to us, they cheated to us, you know. What was the madness of trying to attack Saddam? Yeah, completely. Like there was a kind of couldn't remember what had happened in the previous lifespan.
Very convenient mentality to have. We've got one question at the back.
A few people like that around today, by the way. There's one more.
No, not you. Sorry, sir. This fellow here, blue shirt. Yeah. Is it blue? Green? Blue. Yeah, blue.
Blue shirts was the Irish fascist movement, wasn't it? It was.
I mean, no, I'm sorry, I wasn't making any kind of political comment.
Hi, Justin Carsmani, Associated Press, Television News. I just read an interview with you very recently that you didn't want to interview bin Laden again, although you've interviewed him 3 times after 9/11. Why was that particularly?
That sounds like
what did you? What could the West or the United Nations? What should they do with bin Laden? I mean, what is there to do?
Nothing. I think the interview. I've done quite a few interviews about bin Laden. As you know, he's going to follow me for the rest of my days, like the albatross. I didn't say I wouldn't interview him again. I said I wasn't really very interested in interviewing him again. Because you see, for me, bin Laden, look, his achievement in his eyes is he's created Al-Qaeda, which is a unique, unprecedented phenomenon. Let's not call it an organization. And it is Al-Qaeda that we have to deal with. The monster has been born. If you bomb bin Laden, chop off his legs, pull out his kidney dialysis machine, he doesn't have kidney problems, that's rubbish, but you know, when he dies of old age, it will make absolutely no difference. It's the same thing as, you know, after the atom bomb is created, you can go around killing or arresting every nuclear scientist in the world, but it won't do any good. The atom bomb is there and we are going to have to live with it. Now, the only way you can deal with Al-Qaeda at the end of the day is to start dealing with injustice. And that is the way forward. What institution you use, the United Nations, the European Union, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty, I don't know. But that is the only way to switch Al-Qaeda off. But we won't even make the connection. We still say that bombings have nothing to do with Iraq, even when a killer pops up on a videotape and says it is after he's dead. You know, and we're told, oh, it's because they hate our values and, you know, it's good and evil and right and wrong and black and white. You know, very often Bush's speeches sound like bin Laden and vice versa. But that's the answer. I'm not interested in him. I'm really pretty indifferent towards him. I think he's irrelevant now. I don't think you'd find the Pentagon think that, though they have spent an awful long time trying to find him and have failed, haven't they? Like they have with Mladic, like they have with Mullah Omar, like they have with Karadzic. Not very good in finding people, are we?
Do you want to read that last thing that you wanted to read?
No, I think we probably...
Okay, all right, so... Ladies and gentlemen, a giant of international journalism, Robert Fisk.
God, Jeremy.